Hello and welcome back to the channel once again. My name is Andy and today we move on in the Classic Cars and Motorsport series, and we move on to the part that I was getting quite excited about, because now we're getting to go right back in time, because now we're moving on to the Project Cars 2 set of cars, and that means we've got a list of the next 5 parts being about the historic Team Lotus. You can see the car we're talking about on screen just now. It is the Lotus Type 25 that we are discussing today. This is a car that was successful right out the box, if a bit fragile, and was still successful for some privateer teams 6 years later. Such was its unique design in F1 history. As always though, before we get started, thank you very much for watching this latest episode of the Classic Car series. If you are enjoying, do hit the subscribe button and remember to hit the bell icon as well so you get updated with every video that comes out from myself. Also hit the like button too and comment below, because this car does have a lot of history behind it, and I'd love to know what you think about it as well. I will just quickly point out that the video you see on screen is not of my own doing. I will admit to that. I found it on YouTube. I will link the original video in the description and make sure that they get all the credit for it, but I wanted to make sure you've seen some fantastic footage here of this beautiful car. So, we're taking a trip back to the early 60s, the swinging 60s as it was, obviously, a time where the rule book was a lot simpler and the rules could be as loosely interpreted as the next girl's skirt. The Lotus 25 is a prime example of that, and its pioneer, the designer Colin Chapman, who is just an absolute genius, most people will tell you, and it's quite clear to see why. So back at the time, around 62-63, most of the cars on the grid were tubular steel frame chassis, and the chassis was separate to the engine, so it was obviously like 2 parts. So Chapman came up with an idea on a restaurant napkin of all things, for an aluminium space frame design. It was structurally stronger and lighter thanks to the aluminium alloy being used in the frame. Also increased the torsion rigidity, but less rate as well, with a smaller frontal area. And what made it also unique as well was that the engine bolted onto the back of the chassis, making it as one. So it was all part of the one design. It was the engine became part of the stress bearings as well to the actual chassis, and that just meant that it was a revolution at the time. The engine that was bolted on was a Coventry Climax 1.5 litre, producing just shy of 200 horsepower at around about 8,500 RPM max. But you can see from the bit on screen just now how tight the cockpit is, and that was one of its key designs in getting the nickname off the bathtub, as you have a look there at the sequential 5-speed gearbox gear lever on the right hand side. It was so tight, Chapman himself sat in it and felt he had too much room, and he says, take another 1.5 inches off it. And even the designers themselves admit that they were flying by the seat of their pants, so to speak, when they were designing this car, because it was so revolutionary. Obviously Chapman's designs were seen as being fast but fragile, something that a lot of people didn't quite like too much, but obviously everyone had their opinions. But when this car came out, a lot of teams were a bit pissed off, because at that time, unlike now, you could buy cars, you could buy the chassis and the engine from privateer and become a privateer team if you had the money. And a lot of teams, including the likes of Brabham originally and things like that, teams like that, were buying the Lotus 24 under the understanding they were going to have the same car as the factory team. Except for one clever part that Chapman put into the contracts, which was that he maintained the right to change the design of the car. Structurally, in terms of mechanicals, it would be the same, but he maintained the right to change the design, and with the 25 he did just that. You can see there the twin bore exhaust sticking out the back of that 1.5 litre V8 as well, and you can see just how tightly compact it is too, the engine being right under basically where the driver is sitting. And the bathtub as well, also the fuel, just basically big fuel tank right round where the driver was sitting, so if it burst then you ended up sitting in a tank of fuel, and that happened to Jackie Stewart in in the race in Belgium about 5-6 years later. Don't think it was in the 25, that one, but it was in a car that had obviously taken its design inspiration from the 25. But Jimmy Clark, who was obviously the main driver for Lotus, he nearly won the championship in its first year out in 62. And then in 1963, in a 10 race championship, Clark finished on the top 3 steps of the podium every race bar one, and the one race he didn't was the Monaco Grand Prix, which at that point was the season opener. Every other race was first, second or third, took the championship at a canter. The car was just so good in his hands, and he was just so good at being able to manage the fragile nature of the car as well. He was very gentle on the car. He didn't put under a lot of stress, but he was very quick with it as he was driving. And that was something that you could see when you look at the results of other drivers who drove this car. They didn't have anywhere near the success that Clark did. He took 7 wins in 63, at that time a record, so he won 70% of the races that year, which is just mind-boggling to think of. Just absolutely incredible that he could win just that much in one season. Took the championship easily. Obviously he only missed out by last race in 62. The car was still being used as far up as 1968 for some privateer teams, and in fact Clark himself used the car for one race, which was the French Grand Prix in 1965, which was his second championship winning year, and he won that race as well. So in the hands of the Scotsman, it was definitely an extremely quick car, and it was just one example of Chapman and Lotus breaking new boundaries, and we're going to go through that. We're going to go through the years in the next couple of episodes, through the Lotus cars itself, and we're going to go through and see just the changes that this team had through the years from the 60s right up to the 80s as well. But what we're going to do now is we're going to do a 2-lap last to first challenge. We're going to do it around the historic Spa circuit as well, because that's where the car had its debut win on only its third outing. So we're going to do that now. It's 20 car field in this one, and we're going to see how well I can do now that we're on Project Cars rather than F1 2017. So on the grid here for the red lights, and away we go. Obviously the start line back in the day was at the top of La Sauce Hairpin rather than before it, and the first corner was Eau Rouge itself, and back then, as you can see, very different. You've got a brick wall to the side where the river runs under the track, hence the name Eau Rouge, Red River, runs under the track there, and you come up and over what is now Radion, and you start heading towards Les Combes, but it's not the straight that it is these days. And then once we get to Les Combes, you end up actually turning off at what the corner is now known as Malmedy, and you then join the rest of the old version of the track. And of course back in the days in the 60s and that, it was public roads that you were driving on. So here we are going through what is now Malmedy corner in F1, which is just after Les Combes, and we're heading out towards the countryside and up towards Bourneville, which is where we start to sweep round towards what is Malmedy in the old circuit, which is where the village of Malmedy is, and then we start heading towards what is seen by many as the most difficult corner back at this time. It wasn't Eau Rouge, it was the Master Kink, and we'll come to that shortly. But we're coming up now through Bourneville, which is the end of sector 1. You see the corner's just slightly banked as well, as we're going through. Very tricky to get right. It's trying to keep it full throttle, but I just didn't have the turning abilities that I really wanted, and you can see there the physics of Project Cars working really well to let me get past that car too. So we're heading through Malmedy village, so we're actually passing entire villages as in the forest area to the right and the left. And you can see I'm struggling to keep up down the long straight towards Master. I had put a longer high gear in, but it just wasn't doing the trick, and I was just getting absolutely swallowed at the best of times. We're heading up towards Master. This is a left-right kink. Very fast, flat out almost for some occasions. I've slowed down because I can see what's going on ahead, and I know the car just won't turn where I want it to. we try and get a run out of there. We got through it this time, thankfully, and heading down towards Stavelot. Now we all know Stavelot these days, which is where the old track rejoins the new version of the track, and then you head up towards Blanchimont. We've got a long way to go before we get there, but Stavelot back here is, I have a crash that would have killed me back in the 60s, is a banked corner again, very quick. They're dropping to about 4th gear. I had to take 3rd the next lap round, I remember, because of this part. It was very tight and the car's all slowing down as we come through Hollowell, and as I say, just entire villages. You can see houses and everything as we're going past through Hollowell, and then we come up to La Carrière, which is a sweeping left-hander, and then you eventually head up to what would be rejoining the track, and then Blanchimont, and back onto where the new track meets nowadays. But coming through first, you're talking, this is about 8 kilometres, I can't quite remember, like 8 miles, 12 kilometres or something like that. Absolutely massive distance that it had. Let's try to find it again here. I've got a computer in front of me because I didn't write it down like an idiot. Let's see. Yeah, goodness, it was 8.7 miles, 14.1 kilometres. Lap record was Henry Pescarolo in a Matra World Series World Sports Car, 3 minutes 13. It just shows you how long the track was. Even in the 70s, the cars were absolutely doing 3 minutes to do 8 miles. Just astonishing. We're coming up to Blanchimont now though, and we're heading through it. So this is where we're now back onto the current day tracks. You'll start to recognise bits of where we are. And we're coming up to La Source to finish the lap. But these cars are fun to drive, even with the assists off, having a Fentec, no ABS, no traction control, stability control, none of those gubbins. You can still handle this car very easily indeed, in terms of getting the power down out of the corners. Very easy to get a 4-wheel drift going as well. Brilliant to drive. If you've not driven any of these cars on Project Cars 2, do so, because it's good fun. Obviously the more power you get, the further into the current years you go, it is obviously a bit trickier. But this car here, just shy of 200 horsepower, but so light and easily capable of doing upwards of 170, 80 plus, which back in the 60s with very little safety equipment, hay bales and Armco at the side, as you can see in the trees, just incredible. And obviously it was Jim Clark's fellow Scotsman Jackie Stewart who started the sort of safety crusade in the mid to late 60s that seen this version of Spa close, and the likes of the Nürburgring stopped being raced at as well, in the old Nordschleife. And one of the main reasons is, from this race in 1966, the Belgium Grand Prix, Stewart had a crash at the Master Kink where he went off the road, atrocious conditions, absolute deluge of weather, pouring with rain, and many cars spinned off. Only about a handful of cars made it round the first lap, it was that bad. And Stewart had gone off backwards down an embankment, basically landed in outside a barn, for basically almost through someone's house. Just ridiculous. And the tub of the car split, and he was sitting in a tub of fuel, gasoline, and the steering wheel had bent itself so badly that he couldn't get out. He was drifting in and out of consciousness, and it took, I think it was something like 10 minutes to find him. It was Graham Hill who actually went off the track the following lap, and he looked over and went, "Oh, he looks in bad shape." There's actually an interview about it. You can see Graham with his usual wit and charm, but about here is where it happened. And Stewart finally got an ambulance out. He got taken to the medical centre as it would be nowadays, and that day it was just a hut. And then he got transported to hospital in an ambulance, and the ambulance driver actually got lost, didn't know where the hospital was. And when he got to the hospital, he was then laid on a floor on the stretcher, on the floor itself, and cigarette butts and everything around. And that was kind of like his sort of moment where he went, "This needs to change." And you can see the difference with safety as we go through, because the next car is the Lotus 49, and the 49C, because there's two versions of this car. And that's where aerodynamics start coming in, and that's where things even got worse for a while. It was a crazy time. You had a 1 in 3 chance of living back in the 60s and 70s in F1. You had a 2/3 chance of dying. There's more chance of dying in this race back in the day than there was of surviving. And it's no surprise that many did lose their life. Clark himself did lose his life, but he lost his life in an F2 race in 1967, 68? I think it was 67 actually. And that was at Hockenheim, and the car flew off the road into a tree, and he got flung from the car. And yeah, I've seen, you can probably find pictures of the car afterwards. It's mangled, really is. So we've got the better for it, as I have another accident coming up to Blanchimont, and I'm coming up to the end of that. So unfortunately, new game as I bumped somebody off. Still can't get to the top of the leaderboard though. But only 2 laps for this last, the first charge, because the lap is just so long. And if I'd done a 5 lapper, I would be here all week, it would feel like. But we have reached the end of the lap in the video, so thank you again for watching. It's been good fun as we're trying to sneak the top 10 through La Sauce. Next week, Lotus 49, as I've just mentioned there, and that's where we start seeing wings coming into it and aerodynamics. But until next week, I'll see you again soon.